Okay, everybody, time for putting everything together that we've learned about recipe costing so far, right? So we're going to get our true cost proportion, or the final price that we're going to use to determine our selling price in the next chapter. So for an entree, like I talked about in the last video, we're going to take the dish's portion cost that's already been spice factor adjusted and add our Q factor, right? So here's an example. If the restaurant's Q factor is $1.17 and a particular entree costs $6.22, what's our adjusted or our true cost proportion? Well, we're going to take our $1.17 of our Q factor and add that to our cost proportion of $6.22, which is going to give us a total of $7.39. So that's the price that we would use to determine our selling price using some methods that we're going to learn about later, right? So to calculate the cost proportion from the costing sheet, we take our total recipe and divide it by our yield to get our portion cost, right? To get our cost proportion, right? And then we're going to multiply times our spice factor, which was that 1 plus the percentage as a decimal to get our true cost proportion. Again, we could have added the spice factor before we divided by the portion. Spice factor works in those two different ways, right? Whichever one makes more sense to you, you go with that. And then if it's an entree, we're going to add on that Q factor at the end to get our final true cost proportion. Okay. So one final example, we have an entree recipe that serves 36 portions and costs $138.96 total. Spice factor is 2.6% and Q factor is 2.78%. What's the true cost proportion of this dish? So we've got a couple of different routes that we can take here, right? We can do the spice factor on the whole recipe, or we can do the spice factor on the portion. It's really up to you. There's no wrong answer. I like to say it's like driving to Calgary. You can take Highway 2 down to Calgary, or you can take Highway 2A down to Calgary. You're both going to get there to the same destination. You're just taking a little bit different route, right? So we could figure out how it showed it in the slide before, and we take our total cost of $138.96 and divide by our 36 portions to give us $3.86 per portion, right? And then we want to take that and multiply times our spice factor of 1.026 because we turned that into a decimal and added our 1, which is going to give us a portion cost of $3.96, right? Now we want to be adding on our Q factor, right? And our Q factor is $2.78. So we're going to add on our $2.78, and we'll end up with a true cost proportion on this dish of $6.74, right? The key to this one is remembering that spice factor is 2.6%, so it's multiplied, and then Q factor is a portion cost, so we need to add that, right? So if we did it the other way, and we did 138.96 times 1.026, we would get, I don't have those calculated, so we'll do that, 38.96 times 1.026. We're going to get a total recipe cost spice factor adjusted of 142.57. And then we still need to divide by our 36 portions before we can add our Q factor, because this $142.57 is accounting for 36 portions. Q factor is for 1 portion, right? So we're going to divide by 36, which is going to give us a portion cost of $3.96, which, hey, look, we're in the same spot, right? So we add our 278 now, and we end up with our 674. So it doesn't really matter which route you go. There's Highway 2, and this is 2A, right? Whichever way makes sense to you, okay? So if we go back to our original recipe that we started with in this whole chapter on couscous, right? We had the total recipe cost us $4.01 1 cent, basically, right? We divided that by 8 portions in the recipe, and it came up with about 50 cents. With added our spice factor in of 3.1%, we ended up with 52 cents. Now there's no Q factor here because this is a salad, probably. It's not an entree. This might be a recipe we would use to calculate Q factor, or one of the ones that would be a choice for somebody. Maybe they had a choice of a hamburger with couscous salad, right? And or fries, right? So this may be one of our values of our recipes for our add-ins that we would be considering to see if that was part of our Q factor or not. Was it the most expensive option, right? But in the case for couscous, it's just straight recipe. It's 52 cents per portion, okay? All right, so that is how we cost a recipe. I think I've got one more video in this series on recipe costing, talking about standardized recipes, which will be the next one coming up.